Well, this is Impact Masters podcast brought to you by impactmasters.io, disrupting the status quo in every aspect and always bringing you guests worth noting, movers and shakers in different sectors with the intention of educating you, empowering you, and building your body, mind, and spirit to ensure that you're ready for whatever you do and even take over in every sector and bring the necessary change. Now, most companies do not fail because the founder lacked ambition. They fail because the company grows faster than the leadership system underneath it. And with that in mind, at the beginning, charisma can carry the room. Urgency can cover weak structure. Loyalty can hide and clear accountability. But as a company scales, more people, more customers, more capital, and more pressure, every weakness becomes visible. And that is where leadership becomes very real. Today's conversation is about servant leadership, but not as a soft slogan. We're not here to motivate you. We are here to tell you and discuss with you what really it means to be a servant leader. An aspect that builds companies that grow, execute, and endure. And how do leaders serve the mission without avoiding a decision? That's a question every person is asking right now. And how do founders move from being the best operator in the company to become the architect of the same company? So, with that in mind, I want to introduce our guest today, who actually has over 35 years of experience in every aspect of running a business. That is David Guttman, a serial entrepreneur, executive leader, business strategist, mentor, speaker, and podcast host with decades of experience building, buying, scaling, and executing companies across multiple industries. His podcast goes by the same name, David Guttman. You can check it out on all platforms. David brings a rare combination of business fundamentals, technical grounding, leadership depth, and human perspective. We'll talk about scaling companies from the operator's seat, lessons from working with founders and investors, leaders under pressure, AI, longevity, 30 acts of kindness, Titan Arc, and what it means to build something that creates both enterprise value and human value. David, welcome to Impact Masters podcast today.
Michael, thanks for having me on, and thanks for the wonderful introduction.
Yeah. So, David, before we get into the frameworks and scaling lessons, I want to begin with the core tension, which actually everyone who will be joining us or who will watch this later is asking. A lot of people use the phrase servant leadership, but it can mean very different things depending on who is saying it. Some people hear it and think empathy. Others hear it and think weakness. Others hear it and think culture. But when a business is under pressure, when revenue is not where it should be, when teams are stretched and when investors expect results, when the market is moving, leadership becomes much, much more concrete. And some of these weaknesses come out, and the true nature of servant leadership is required. But most of the time, it is really, really hard to hide beneath the slogan. So when a company is under real pressure, what does servant leadership actually look like? But hold your thoughts for a moment on that question.
Yeah.
Tell us who is David.
Mm-hmm.
Just go back and tell us who is David.
So as you said, I just turned 60 a few months ago. I've been a serial entrepreneur for the last 35 years. I think I've worked in something like 45, it might even be close to 50 industries at this point. In fact, I've only worked in the same industry twice, one time. I've been in the crypto industry, 2 different companies. Otherwise, it's always been, one time in a given industry. So, and actually, some people see that as a disadvantage. I actually see it as an advantage. My dad started a software company in his late 20s that eventually went public. So I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And just observing my dad and other entrepreneurs, not just to see what they were good at, but also to see where their weaknesses were, where their blind spots were. And so for me, that's what I really tried to focus on is always being open to having a blind spot, trying to avoid blind spots as much as I could. And early in my career, I had a mix of a couple of really good leaders that I worked for and a couple of terrible leaders that I worked for. And it was actually really important and useful for me to have both experiences. I remember years ago, I have a 26-year-old daughter as my only child. And she asked me, and my daughter does not like to give me a compliment. So let me start there. She hates giving me compliments. She already thinks I hold too high an opinion of myself. But anyway, um, in a moment of weakness, she's like, "Dad, you're a really good parent. How do you know how to be a good parent?" And I thought about it because I was like, I don't want to, whatever answer I give her, she's probably going to remember when she's 35 and she's going to repeat it back to me. So I don't want to screw it up. So I thought about it for about 30 seconds and I said, it's really simple. All the things your parents do that you like, do those. All the things that your parents do that you hate, do the opposite. And if you can do that and then show up with love and be present, you'll be a really good parent. I feel like leadership's a lot the same, especially when it comes to servant leadership. The trick about leadership is when people are initially early in their career, when they're a really good operator and they eventually get put into a position of leadership, maybe you're just a shift supervisor or a manager or even the CEO. Oftentimes, especially when it's your first time doing that, it's also very much like being a parent. There's no handbook. There's no like, oh, here's how to be a good parent. You figure things out by doing them. And in the absence of knowing what to do, you make your best educated guess. And the problem is most people guess wrong. They think that what a leader does is pound the desk, do as I say. They have more of what I'll call more of a fear-based leadership style. And part of the reason they do that is understandable. It's that it is true that sometimes a fear-based approach can be slightly better in the very, very short term. In the medium term and long term, it's much worse, but it can be somewhat effective in the very, very short term. And I think because of that, people make a mistake. And so they act how they think a leader is supposed to act versus how, having any actual real knowledge. And you're right. People do misunderstand the term servant leadership. They often think of it as being, a pushover or easy to take advantage of or being too soft. You also hear advice, don't work with people that you're friends with, which I think is terrible advice, actually. And so for me, and I learned this, but because I did it wrong early in my career, I had a mentor, and I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I had a woman, even though she technically worked for me, she was my mentor. She was probably 15 years older than me, one of the best leaders I've ever met before or since. And I don't even remember the exact details, but we were in a meeting. And the part I do remember is I said something obnoxious, right? I said something I shouldn't have said. And after the meeting was over, not in front of anyone else, just her and I, she said, Dave, you should never ask a question that the only answer someone can give you is, I'm an idiot. And it was her way of saying, like, don't be a jerk, right? Always look for a way to be kind. If you have to give someone, negative feedback or criticism or whatever, you want to do it in a way that's as kind as possible. She also taught me that what really good leaders do is they deflect as much credit as humanly possible and they absorb as much blame as humanly possible. And if you can do those things and understand that if you really are a servant leader, and I'll come back to why I think it's so important in a second. If you really are a servant leader, you're going to be at least 30% therapist, right? You're going to be, and you're going to, you serve the people that you lead, not the other way around. It is a privilege to lead other people. And unfortunately, most leaders don't treat it like the privilege that it is. And the reason why I think it's so important, and part of the problem is you'll see exceptional entrepreneurs like an Elon Musk or a Steve Jobs, or Larry Ellison from Oracle, unbelievably successful people. These are not nice guys. I have a close friend of mine that worked for Elon for 11 years. Not a nice guy, but people are willing to tolerate their bad leadership because they're so brilliant and there's so much other things they can learn. And the thing people get wrong is they think they're successful because they're jerks. They're successful in spite of the fact that they're a jerk. For us mere mortals that are not as brilliant as a Steve Jobs or an Elon Musk, being a decent human being and being a servant leader and serving the people that you lead, in my opinion, always get you the best result. And the example I give often is we've all worked for that boss that really cares about us deeply, right? We've also worked for that boss that doesn't care about us at all. And even if you're a very self-motivated, hardworking person, that person that really cares about you is going to get your absolute best. That other person, they'll still get good work maybe if you're self-directed and self-motivated, but they're not going to get your absolute best. My experience is, say something goes wrong in the business and I need people to work on the weekend. I don't even need to ask. They're going to volunteer because of the kind of leader that I am. And so I think that if people think that their fiduciary responsibility as the leader or CEO of a company, let's just use that role as an example, is to put the company first and the people second, it's just not true. To me, the best result is you put the people first and the company second. If you take care of their people, you take care of your people, they'll take care of your customers, but it doesn't work the other way around.
Absolutely. You talk about kindness, and there's a book I read some time back about love and power. And this talks about, legacy companies like Shell, takeover of different resources in different regions versus empowering those regions. It even goes ahead and talks about, family, balance between power and love. And sometime when you're a leader, you've been added power. And kindness actually, if it's not there naturally, it really doesn't, it always show, right? You can only pretend for so long. So I want to know exactly how do leaders confuse kindness with avoidance, and how leaders, how do you serve people without protecting them from accountability? Because at the end of the day, there's a time you need to call out, accountability, and that responsibility goes a long way to take the company where it is. But you have to do that with a lot of, humanity and kindness.
So I think people make the mistake of thinking that those things are at odds with each other, accountability and kindness, that those are at odds with each other. I don't think that's true at all. I think that they're completely in alignment. Let's say that I have someone, and I'll say this, I don't hire someone if I don't enjoy them as a person. We don't have to be best friends, but I have to at least, want to, like, it shouldn't be painful to spend time with that person, right? I want to at least like everyone that I work with as a person to some extent. I want to think they have a good moral compass. But I'm actually very close friends with, in fact, almost all of my close friends are either people that I've worked with in the past or that I'm working with now. And and I actually don't find, so people say, well, hey, if you're working with your friends, maybe it's, hard to fire them or hard to give them negative feedback. Not my experience at all. I mean, again, I don't like firing anyone, even someone I don't like. I mean, if you enjoy firing someone, you probably should have your head examined, right? Like there's something wrong with you. So, even if it's someone who deserved it, if you relish firing someone, that's a personality disorder. But in my experience, when I care about someone, I have to give them feedback that, that, hey, look, let's talk about what's going on. Here's the other thing that I do. Whenever someone makes a mistake, even if it's a big one, I don't focus on the person at all. I focus on the problem. And I'll say, well, after we solve the problem, we'll come back and we'll figure out what happened and how we can avoid it in the future. But let's first solve the problem. And I use terms like we and us, not you. And, and I'll be like, hey, where are we? Let's be really clear-eyed about what happened in terms of where we sit. And then let's see what options we have as a team to fix the situation. And then when it's done, I might take that person aside and be like, hey, Mark, let's talk about what happened here. I'm not trying to assign blame. At the end of the day, if I'm the boss, it's ultimately all my fault. If I hired the wrong person, if I didn't give them the right resources, if I didn't give them the right training, if I didn't give them the right support, if I hired wrong, like these are all my mistakes. So I really do see it as my fault. So I try to get to the core of the problem. And my experience is people that I'm friends with, they don't want to let me down. They want to give me their absolute best because they don't want the person who they respect and admire and who they see as a friend to disappoint that person. And what a lot of this comes down to ultimately, forget about friendship or not friendship, is you have to hire right. You have to hire right, and you have to fire fast when you make a hiring mistake. Because if you have the right people on the team, servant leadership is by far the best approach. If you have the wrong people on the team, servant leadership is not a good approach. So, you have to kind of, if you don't have a good set of core values, if you as a leader don't have a good moral compass, and you don't hire right, then servant leadership approach won't work. One of the things as I mentioned before, I have a 26-year-old daughter, and she's in the process of wanting to change, career paths. And my guidance to her is the single most important thing about the next company you go to work for is how aligned your value system is with that of the CEO. The bigger the gap, the bigger the distance between your value system, your moral compass, and that of the leader who's driving the company, the bigger that distance, the more unhappy you're going to be. And the closer those are together, the happier you're going to be. So long answer to your question, but I actually don't find it that those things are out of alignment. I feel like they go hand in hand.
Absolutely. And I know definitely when you scale a company, you can't avoid to make a few wrong hires, and then, the trickle effect is always visible. What is the biggest, before even the biggest misunderstanding that people have about kindness is, how do you fix that? Because of course you'll hire someone, you'll give them some, responsibility to hire more people. And, that mistake, if it's repeated severally, you can see it actually scale as you scale the company. But in there, there's what people think is kindness, right? And also there's what people think is servant leadership. But definitely it is not. It is just convincing yourself you're kind and you're servant leader, but how it is translated is not actually that.
Well, one of the things about leadership is, and I tell this to people that I mentor or people that have been leaders that worked under me, the only measure of whether you're a good leader or not is how the people that you lead think about you as a leader. If they think you suck as a leader, you suck as a leader. Your opinion is irrelevant, right? Like, it's very clear. And, and you need to fix that in the same way that when that person who worked for me said, Dave, don't be a jerk, right? I had to look at myself in the mirror and be like, she's right, I'm wrong. I now have to work differently moving forward. And that was a very intentional thing for me. And I think that really is what it comes down to. I'll say it this way. When you think about it, people who want to be police officers often shouldn't. People that want to be politicians often shouldn't. People who seek power frequently shouldn't have it, unfortunately, right? And it makes sense that people that want power are going to be drawn to professions and positions where they have power. Being a CEO, being a senior leader in a company is very much the same way. There's a reason why there's a lot of psychopathy of people that are in the C-suite that are leading these companies, is because people that are drawn to being the boss oftentimes are people that shouldn't be, unfortunately. And that's why it's even more important for people that do have a good moral compass. Like, for me, I don't care about being the boss. I don't care about power. I really don't. I want an outcome, right? And the reason why I ended up in the roles that I ended up in is because I was the best person to execute, right? It came down to that. It wasn't me politicking and angling to get the promotion or whatever. I don't do that. It was just that I wanted a particular outcome, and the best way for me to get there was to lead the team myself. And so that's how I, but unfortunately, there's not enough of that. Too many of the people that are in positions of leadership, are people that are drawn to power, and that's problematic.
Yeah. And that's very important to like point out. I'm wondering, like, is servant leadership more about attitude, personality, behavior, or you can actually create systems that actually, more or less like have checks and balances on how servant leadership it is carried out at scale?
So I think it's relatively straightforward. Like, to me, I see my job as a leader to provide resources and to remove obstacles. That's it. And I guess, and actually three, to remove obstacles, provide resources, and provide direction. As a leader, those are the three things I need to do. And I would argue that the removing obstacles part in particular is about being a servant, and it's about being a good listener. You'd be amazed if you asked every person in your company, Okay, let's say you had a company of 30 people, and you asked every
Mm.
single person in your company, tell me the 3 things that if these were true would make you 25% or more efficient. You'll be amazed by the answers. It might be, man, if I had a second computer monitor, I could get
Mm.
20% more work done. That
Yeah.
monitor costs $400 or whatever, right? You're paying this person $90,000 a year. That's a no-brainer. Like, that's just one example, but you'd be surprised about the answers people would give you. The other thing that I would do, that I think is common among people that are servant leaders, it's what I was saying before about really focusing on the employee first, not just about what's important to the employee within the context of the company that you're running, but them as an individual. So let's just say that the person who worked for me, they were a marathoner, okay, or they were, they had 4 kids who played a lot of sports or whatever it might be. Me knowing what's important to that person and making sure that not just that the work that they gets done and it gets done well, but that the things outside of work are also taken care of, that they get time to train for their marathon. And I'm making sure that I'm going out of my way to make sure that that's true, or to make sure that one of the things I would commonly do is there might be something for someone's professional development that wouldn't actually help them in the company that I was running, but would be
Mm.
good for them longer term in their career progression. I would
Yeah.
get the company to pay for that, even though it wasn't a direct benefit to the company per se. But that employee really appreciated the fact that I am genuinely going out of my way to think about what's going to help them on their career path. And by doing that, you get loyalty. I can't tell you how many people in my career have worked for me at 3, 4, 5 different companies, and they follow me from company to company because I always take care of them. And I look out for them, and they know that. They know I'm always going to be fair-minded with them. That's the other thing I think is a big one. Servant
Yeah.
leaders are always fair-minded. Even when I'll tell you, I fired it's one of the most difficult firings I ever did. It was a guy I was genuinely friends with.
Yeah.
Him and his wife, and me and my wife would go out and do stuff together. And so there was a real relationship there. He wasn't doing the job I needed him to do. It really just wasn't the right role for him. And he wasn't going to be successful. I'd given him feedback. He just wasn't able to make that change that he needed to. And with the day I fired him, his name was Chris. I said, Chris, I said, here are the reasons I'm letting you go. I said, but we're going to stay in this room, and I want you to ask me as many questions as you want, and we will not stop until you are satisfied. We spent 45 minutes, and at the end of it, he wasn't happy he was being fired. Neither was I, frankly. But he understood it. He didn't necessarily 100% agree with it, but he agreed with a lot of
Mm.
it.
Yeah.
And I think that, and I actually know that he went on to be more successful where he went after, because it was a better fit for him than the role that I
Mm.
had him in. So at the end of the day, it comes down to the integrity of being able to be honest with people, which doesn't mean you're a jerk about it. Like, when I deliver negative feedback, I'm always kind about it. Like, you can deliver the same information and be like, oh my God, how could you make that mistake? Versus, hey, look, we all make mistakes. Let's worry about that later. Let's get the problem solved. And then let you and I sit down and figure out how we can avoid this in the future. Same thing, just handled in a different way.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And I'm asking myself, in a high performance environment, sometimes you might be caring but unclear, right? And even in your previous example about, your colleague calling you aside and saying, you know what, David, don't be a jerk. This actually came out as you as a jerk and as a leader. It's not good. How do you more or less like self-correct, but also be clear that this is the new David, this is a new leader, and this is the way I want you to view me? Is it through action more? Is it more communication? Is it listening more? How do you carry that to make sure that you don't interfere with the high performing environment, but also you exemplify the leadership servant kind of leadership?
I think the most important thing, and again, I frequently draw parallels between leadership and parenting because they're very
Mm.
similar, right?
Mm.
Whenever you hear a parent say, like, I remember one of the things I promised myself when I became a parent is I will never say the words "because I said so." So if my kid, your kid says, "Well, how come I can't have a sleepover at Tommy's house?" Well, because I said so. Well, that's not an answer, right?
Mm.
Well, as a
Mm.
boss, it's the same thing. You need to lead by example. You need to have integrity. And so to your direct question, when Sharon was her name, and Sharon gave me the feedback about, the way I had behaved, what I did was I went to the person who I was jerked to, and I sincerely and genuinely and directly, with no equivocation, apologized and said, I didn't handle this right. I was wrong. It won't happen again. And the person was shocked. They're like, whoa, like, and I made sure it never happened again. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it comes down to that, right? It comes down to the fact that you, if you take the position because you're the boss that you're better than or more than the people that work for you, you have a problem. Because, like I said, leadership is a privilege; it's not a right.
Interesting. That is quite useful because it separates servant leadership from being permissive. Sometimes it sounds like you can self-correct, but the action really matters than just, assuming that people see that you're serving them. And it's, it's about, ensuring that everyone is empowered. Whether the leader is clear, fair, and accountable, it's really something that people also can copy and project. But let me build on that. So what breaks when a company starts scaling faster than its leadership capacity?
I think the single biggest reason companies fail is a failure of leadership. People grossly underestimate how big of an impact poor leadership has. I will tell you that there are situations where I was running this foreign exchange prop trading firm in Miami, and after I left that company, the leadership that was in place was terrible. And I am telling you, they got 1/3 to 1/5 of the productivity from the team that I put together than I did, just because they were bad leaders and because the people remaining knew they didn't care about them and they knew they weren't looking out for them. And so what happens when people feel that way? They start looking for another job, especially if you're remote, you start doing other things, you've got a side hustle. You're not going to do that when you really respect and admire the person that you're working for. You don't want to let that person down. And, again, just like good parenting, do you want your child to do the right thing because they're afraid of you, or because they want you to respect and admire them? So, it's not even close. Like, I think about, even now as an adult, it's a little bit reversed, I guess, but the parallel still applies, which is, my moral compass is, my daughter has to be proud of everything I do. So I imagine that anything I'm going to do, I ask myself, how would my daughter feel about the action I'm about to take? And if she would look down on the action I was going to take, I just don't do it. So you have to have a moral compass, and you have to have a set of values that are you just don't modify no matter what.
Wow. And you mentioned something very important. And one of the key things that I'm asking is that if I'm a leader and I'm scaling and I have these leaders who exemplify the values that I stand for, they're also servant leaders. How do I not lose them? Is it incentives? Is it communication? How do I make sure that they are well, versed and also growing and feeling that growth with me in terms of how they feel at the company? Because at the end of the day, once in a while or once in a lifetime, someone will ask, am I growing here? Have I done enough? Am I doing more? Is there anything to add? But they are really good and they add value every day. But, people have self-doubt at some point. So how do you make sure that you retain that kind of talent?
Well, that's another thing that a good leader does. And again, I'll draw the parenting analogy. If you have 4 kids, you're not going to parent those 4 kids the same way. You're going to parent them very differently. Leaders do the same thing. Part of my job is to understand what makes them tick, right? I have to understand what drives this person, what motivates this person. Sometimes it's prestige, sometimes it's money, sometimes it's having a nice office. I've had people that are unbelievably motivated by having a really high-powered computer that they're using, or, really nice monitors, a really nice desk chair. You'd be surprised by the things that will really motivate somebody. If someone tells me that, they have some lower back issues and having a really comfortable chair is super important to them, maybe that person gets a $2,000 chair. It's like you have to think about what's important, and it isn't for you to decide what's important. It's for you to understand what's important to that person. And I think that's one of the scaling issues that people have is even if the CEO has those qualities, making sure that the people you have in the layers underneath you are also emulating those qualities. But that's part of why corporate, company culture is so important. Earlier in my career, I really used to dismiss that as not important, and that was dumb on my part. As I've gotten older, certainly in the last 15 or 20 years, every company that I've run, I make sure they have a set of core values that everyone is bought into. It's a group exercise. It's not me saying here are the core values. It's a group exercise as an organization. We agree on what those core values are. Every quarter, I would create an award for each. Say there were four core values. I'd create an award for all four core values, and those awards would be distributed once a quarter to different people in the organization as a way to reinforce them. So you have to do things like that so that. And by the way, that set of internal core values for the company, those are the core values that are used to hire, promote, and reward people within the organization. That you have to put it through that filter. And that allows you to be much more consistent. Because again, just like parenting, if a leader says, "Do as I say, not as I do," the parent that tells you don't drink and they're getting hammered all the time, that's not going to work out so good. Same thing.
Yeah.
The leader that says work really hard and they're taking vacation days all the time and working on their golf game, probably not going to work out so well. And I mean, I've seen this myself where, the CEO of the company, wastes so much money. They have I've literally seen this. They have a personal chef, a personal trainer that the company's paying for, but they're laying people off because the company's not profitable enough. Well, what do you think that's going to do to the company, right? It's going to demoralize everybody. And, I've seen that with my own two eyes more times than I care to think about.
No, it's out there now with AI. AI is the scapegoat nowadays, but we'll talk about the AI when we get there. And this actually brings me to you have actually been a place where you are taking company IPO, raising funds, or even investing in companies. So what does the board or investor often see before the founder sees it in themselves, and even exemplify it more when they get the resources?
But just to be clear, I've never taken a company public myself. I have 8 and 9 figure exits, but I've never taken a company public. I've had VC exits, private equity exits, but just to be clear, I will say this. One of the pieces of advice that I give the people that I mentor, even really early stage companies, to your question about boards of directors, even small companies should have a board of directors, and you should have quarterly board meetings. So I'll tell you the way I do it that I know is really effective. This may not be the only way to do it, but this way I know is effective. One, whenever it's my decision, every single employee in the company has equity. Every single one. If you want people to act like owners, you have to make them owners. And even if you just set aside 10% of the equity for non-founders, I promise you that giving away that 10% of the company will increase the value of the company by way more than 10%. It won't even be close. So even if you're just a selfish jerk, you'd still be better off to be generous and give away 10% of the company. But so anyway, everyone's an owner, everyone's an equity holder. I insist on there being a board of directors, and I insist on there being quarterly board meetings, and I insist on there being a financial budget for every single fiscal year. And then what I do is at those quarterly board meetings, and by the way, preparing for quarterly board meetings is a pain in the butt. It is. With that being said, I've probably prepared for 100 board meetings in my career. Every single time, and I'm a pretty data-driven guy. I'm in the weeds. I know my businesses deeply. Every time I prep for a board meeting, I learn something about the business in that preparation exercise that I wasn't aware of before I did that. So I always find benefit from it, even though it's a bit of a pain. And then what I do is I present to the board of directors, and I keep a really open mind to get input and feedback from them. And if you've structured your board properly, you have people that have industry expertise, they have functional expertise. Maybe they've helped exit businesses in your industry before, so they have expertise they're bringing to the table. When people have deeper expertise than you, listen to them. They have expertise. And then the other thing that I do is I take that same board presentation that I gave to the board of directors, and the week after the board meeting, I present it to the entire company, because I serve the people. They're all shareholders, so I am at their service. So I give them effectively. I mean, if I have stuff in there about firing people or some things that might upset people, I might not present that part, but everything else gets presented to the company, the exact same stuff I presented to the board, include all the financials. One of the other things I insist on is every person in my organization has to know how to read an income statement. They have to be able to understand how the company is doing, even if they're just a receptionist. Doesn't matter what their role is, because if they're an equity holder, I want them to know that now their equity is worth more because the company's doing better. So I think if you do those things, you leave yourself open. One, you're very open and transparent about what's working and what's not working. You get feedback and input from people that have domain expertise you don't have. You keep an open mind that you can be wrong about just about anything. You present everything to the entire company, and you have incentive alignment on the equity side. If you can do all of those things, you'll get a good result in almost all cases.
Yeah. And they say trust is earned, and I think that's a proper strategy to really earn that trust, both for your board of trustee or board members, and also the employees who really put their A game every day to make a value for your company or the company that you lead. I want, for those who are watching or listening or who will watch this, I want you to think about this in your own company. What breaks fast under scale? Is it communication? Is it incentives? Is it hiring, decision making, accountability, or trust? Or is it even denial of budgets to remove as a block and enable you to make those decisions at where it matters most? So, David, you have bought and sold and led across different industries. I don't want to go through your career as a chronological biography. I think the more valuable question is about pattern recognition here. So across the companies you have built, acquired and advised or led, what has remained true about business and leadership even when the industry changed?
I think most businesses are more the same than they are different. Even if you have a product business versus a service business, a SaaS business versus a traditional more transactional business. You still have customer acquisition costs. You still have lifetime value of a customer. You still have gross margin. You have net margin. These are all true of any business. And understanding those unit economics really well and making sure that everyone in the organization understands those, that everyone understands what's driving things that are making things better and what's driving things that are making things worse. So you can do less of the things that make it worse and more of the things that you do that are better. It sounds overly simplistic, but at the end of the day, back earlier in my career, I had about a 3-year period of time where I was partnered up with a guy. He would sell these consulting projects and I would do all the work. He basically billed me out at $400 an hour. He'd keep $200 an hour for selling the project, and I'd make $200 an hour for doing the work. And he would sell these projects in industries I knew nothing about.
Yeah.
And the part that really struck me about that whole experience was I didn't need to understand the industry to be able to understand the business and what was broken. And the way that I would do it was I would talk to every single person in the organization, from the receptionist to the CEO and everybody in between. And the answer to whatever problems they had, maybe the receptionist had 2% of the answer and the CEO had 15% of the answer and the chief marketing officer had 5% of the answer. But if I just talked to everyone and listened carefully and synthesize what they told me, I could almost always fix the business. My experience is 90% of the time, any business can be fixed and improved. 10% of the time you're screwed, right?
Yeah.
But those are still pretty good odds, right? So to me, it's like, it really comes down to being clear-eyed about what's working and what's not working. You said this before, but you're so right about this. Communication is so critical. If everyone's not in alignment, you'd be surprised. I can't tell you the number of times I've come out of a meeting and I'll be talking to 2 different people separately about the meeting we were just all in together. And person A will tell me that this was the conclusion that was drawn, and person B will tell me a completely different conclusion. Like, we were all in the same meeting.
People don't process information the same.
They don't. Exactly. They have all their biases and their backgrounds, and they don't realize. And that, again, that comes back to what a really good leader does is you need to be that leveling voice of reason that really is clear-eyed about things, which is, again, easy to say and hard to do. But it's funny. I'm working on this book. I'm co-authoring a book with an 18-year-old, if you can believe it. So a
Wow.
60-year-old and an 18-year-old, we're co-authoring this book together. It's called Life Maxing.
Mhm.
But one of the things we talk about is trying to extract emotions from decision making.
Mm,
Emotions are actually very useful tools to give you information and even some insights, but they're terrible decision making tools. You know how they
mm,
say, don't go food shopping when you're hungry, right? Don't make decisions. Don't make decisions when you're angry
mm,
or fearful or even happy. Like if you have a really strong emotion, even a positive one, that's not the best
mm,
point of view to make decisions from. So,
mm.
as a good leader, you have to be able to pull yourself out of the situation and be more of an observer than a participant. And that allows you to be a little bit more clear eyed about what did we agree to in that meeting. And part of what I do in my leadership style, and I can encourage other leaders to do, is because I know that people are going to get it wrong, right? Sometimes I'll
Mhm.
get it wrong too, but more often than not, other people will get it wrong. It's my job to make sure that I communicate back to everyone what we all agreed to. So
Mm.
that if there is a misunderstanding, it's dealt with in the beginning instead of weeks later when it's too late to mitigate the problem.
Yeah,
So a lot of it comes down to being your ability to take yourself out of the situation, be objective, and be a really clear communicator.
yeah, wonderful. Uh, so, David, you have a background in computer science, and I'm wondering, what did that teach you about business systems?
So I think the two things that have helped me the most
Mm,
is having a strong technical background and having a strong financial background. Like I'm very strong in both of those areas, and they're both really important for different reasons. The financial
mm,
one is important to every business, and I'm actually, Michael, I've been very surprised throughout my career, but
mm,
something like 95% of businesses doing under 25 million a year in revenue don't have a budget. Okay,
mm,
that's insane to me. Um, every single company I mentor, they all have a budget, every last one of them. And they all do
mm,
variance analysis that, with their actuals versus, the budget. And then we talk about what went better, what went worse. So having that, and it's the other reason why I think it's so important that every person in the company be able to read an income statement. I want everyone to be financially literate. I think it's important. Um,
mm,
but the other one that again is a little bit harder to do, maybe a little bit easier now with AI because it's easier to embrace technology with AI than it's ever been. Having a technical background allows me to understand because I think it's the area, technology is the area where people bullshit the most, right? I would say that the people that have worked for me that I've had the most frustration with are chief technology officers because
mm,
I do understand technology. The CTO can't bullshit me like they can bullshit other
mm.
CEOs. And they'll be like, oh, yeah, that's going to take, we're going to need 4 more developers and that's going to take us 6 months. I'm like, no, that's not going to take 4 more developers. Like, I know how hard that thing is that you're trying to do. And you should be able to do it with the resources you have. And it should take 3 months. It shouldn't take 6 months. And if
Yeah,
you think it should take 6 months, you're the wrong guy to manage that team, you
yeah,
know? So I do think having a technical background, having someone that's in your founder team or your chief, your team that you really feel comfortable with, that has a deep understanding of technology, is really important. Again, like with AI, it's becoming a little bit easier. Like again, I with the 30 Acts of Kindness not for profit that I launched with my dad. My dad's 84. He built the MVP of the app for this product in 10 days for like $200. 5 years ago, that would have taken a year and cost 100 grand to do at least. And so
mm.
the leverage point for technology is shifting quickly because of artificial intelligence.
Absolutely, absolutely. But before we go to the AI and what it's doing in the ecosystem and changing the way things are, I want to dig deep on your former business training as a computer scientist. I don't know at what point you said, oh, you know what, I'm going to learn about this formally. Is it to fast track it? Because also there are leaders who don't admit maybe I don't know everything, and maybe the easiest way to get it is go and do an MBA class or do a master class that really will give me deeper understanding and even frameworks or systems that can help me help my team. And when you talk about servant leadership, people think this actually has to be a nest from internal, but sometimes it also requires science and art of managing people, science and art of leadership. I don't know what it was for you that this taught you on operating experience later in your career, and what were the challenges?
Well, it's obviously shifted quite a bit because, back when I went to school in, the 80s, I graduated from college in 1988. Computers were a very different thing back then. And nowadays, it's technology is more of it's just an easier lever to pull than it ever used to be. Like I said, it used to be so expensive and so time consuming to be able to build even basic technical products. That's no
Yeah.
longer true. When I'm embarrassed to say that I gave very little thought to my career early on. Like, I'm like, well, my dad did computer stuff and my brother did computer stuff, so I guess I'll be a computer science major. That's the total amount of thought I gave to it. I was a bit more thoughtful about my MBA, because I wanted to have a broad set of skills, so I understood all aspects of business, which is why I did an MBA. But I wouldn't do that now. Like, something like 75% of the engineers that I've hired in the last 5 years are self-taught with no college degree. In fact, I would argue today that that the self-taught engineers are better than the ones that went to school for it.
Yeah.
The problem, I mean, at the time I went to Brown, I think we had the third highest. I think MIT and Caltech were the only two schools that had a higher rated computer science program than we did, and yet the technology we were learning was 5 years old. And we were like one of the top programs. What you're learning in a university or college is older technology, and it's changing so fast, and even more so now with AI. And I read an article that Spotify said so far in 2026, not a single line of code has been written by a person; it's been written by AI. So, so that the ground is shifting under our feet as we speak when it comes to that. So I was not intentional about my computer science background. I will say that having the technical background was helpful, but it was more luck than skill. That's what I decided to do. And I would say the same thing about getting an MBA. Back when I got my MBA, I graduated in 1994. The internet was just starting. I mean, there was no Amazon. There was no, if you wanted to get information, you would have to go to a class or go to a library or go to a bookstore. That was it. And there weren't even any book reviews. Like, you didn't even know if the book was any good. Maybe someone checked it out. You can't even get the book till next week if they happen to check it back in. I mean, that was how hard it was to accumulate knowledge. Now it's flipped. I would say that there's almost no topic that if you gave me 90 days between the internet, social media, and AI, if you said, Dave, I want you to become an expert on this topic, whatever it is, email marketing, social media management, whatever it is, in 90 days, I could become in the top 10th of the top 1% of people in the world about that topic if that's all I focused on for 3 months. When I was growing up, it might take 10 years to do that. Now it's 3 months. So there's no excuse. You just have to decide. To me, it's more about being able to have some level of discernment and intentionality in what you do, and decide, hey, what do I want to do? What do I want to spend my time getting good at? And making sure that you continue to add things to your talent stack, and that those things are continuing to take you in the direction that you want.
Yeah. And piggybacking on that, if you're a servant leader, how do you harness the same drive for your employees or colleagues to be able to get there in terms of expertise and knowledge? Is it like you have more free time and encourage them to be more intentional in terms of what they want to know and how they want to implement it back in the company? How do you go about that? Because if I don't want to go to, right now, going to school might not be the most important thing right now. Learning yourself and being curious is the most important thing. But there are people who are still stuck with I'm a graduate, I'm a master's, I'm an MBA, I'm this and that. But you see, in technology, things are moving faster than what people already know. What you knew 1 year ago now is available. In fact, 10 years up to now is available to everyone. In fact, at a level that it's more expertise than the person himself. So how do you make sure that you still hold that niche? Because you hear layoff every day in thousands, and these are lives. These are real lives that are impacted. And if there's no correction in that, in terms of how people provide value, then we are doomed in one way. We might be servant leaders, yes, but there are other people who are impacted by these things that are happening across the globe. So how do you, as a servant leader, make sure that even if it happens, someone actually doesn't feel like, I have nothing to offer and that's it for me?
So I think that at the same time, it's never been a scarier time in human history, and it's never been a more exciting time in human history at the same time. The part about it that's interesting to me is um, the next 10 to 15 years. I mean, you said it yourself. These huge companies are laying people off by the tens of thousands, not hundreds or thousands, but tens of thousands. Facebook lays off 20 people. Oracle lays off, sorry, 20,000 people. Oracle lays off 30,000 people. You hear it one after another, and it's going to continue to accelerate. For 80% of the population, the next 10 to 15 years, because of AI, is going to be very, very bumpy, very difficult. But that 20% that will truly embrace AI in a deep way, the next 10 or 15 years are going to be the best years in human history. And the nice thing about it is, the part that I think is encouraging is anyone who chooses to can be in that 20%. It is a choice. Now, you can choose not to. You can choose to put your head in the sand and say, oh, it's not going to replace my job. I'll be fine. I don't care what your job is. If I were a doctor or a lawyer, like in law school or in medical school right now, I would be very, very nervous. My dad, 7 years ago, my dad had lung cancer and he had half of one of his lungs removed, and it was done by a robot. It would have been outpatient. He could have left the same day. My stepmom had knee surgery, also done by a robot. Her recovery time was 1/3 as what it would have been as if a human did that surgery. And that's only going to continue to accelerate. So people thinking that their jobs are safe. Now, with that being said, one of the companies that I run is called Titan Arc. We have a partnership with a company called Corviva. So the two of the founders of Corviva, they have they have the best in the world, in my opinion, MRI technology. So what they did was, the two co-founders, one is a neurological radiologist and one is an orthopedic radiologist. They spent 2 years coding their own AI overlay on top of the MRI imaging. And so they have the best in class. So what did these people do? They're like, hey, AI could replace radiology. Well, it could, but if they embrace it, now they have a best in the world company that nobody else is as good as, because they didn't get scared of it and just pretend it wasn't there. They embraced it. And so I think that's really what it comes down to is, if you want to be in that 20% and not the 80%, go down the rabbit hole. And the part about it that's so exciting for me is, I'm a very creative person, but like, I can't draw a straight line with a ruler. Okay. Like, I'm not artistic in that way, but I was able to write 3 children's books in less than 50 hours, including all of the artwork, by using AI. I couldn't have done that in 2 years before AI. And so if you embrace AI, it will release a level of creativity where you can outsource to AI the parts that you don't want to do, and focus on the creativity part that you do want to do. And so like I said, I think it's super exciting, but I understand why people are also very fearful, because it is going to displace a lot of people.
Yeah, that's very important because, in different industries, some of them are highlighted. And I feel like AI is more given attention and publicity in the tech industry, but there's so much happening underneath. It's just that people have not really realized it, because if you think about Google, digitizing almost 90% of the books in the world, ask yourself, what does that mean? And managing that knowledge is even being computerized using supercomputers, and ensuring that the people who are supposed to get value will get value. But of course, this is accessible and well preserved for future. Because some of the most difficult thing, I think, also was, how do we preserve knowledge and how do we access it at scale? Now that is not a challenge anymore. And in some ways, but there are deeper patterns, like incentive, decision, trust element of it, and even resources that go into such mission, and how even companies are implementing the transition. And this actually often repeats. But let me ask this more directly. When you enter or evaluate any company, what tells you whether the company is healthy beneath the surface. And this is from the leadership to the innovation to the scale and even to the hiring of the people who actually can join that company and still carry out the mission.
I want to make sure I understand the question. So the question is, how do I evaluate whether the company is being well run or not on all those levels? Is that the question?
Even with the new technology and transition, because you see the company that will not also change will become extinct.
I mean, look, it's like if every person in the company, in any company, is not using AI. I mean, maybe not if you work at like McDonald's, I guess, right? But for most companies, like regular companies, if every single employee is not using AI on a daily basis, that company is in trouble. And companies need to make sure that they're budgeting for access to whatever AI tools make sense for everyone in their organization. The company should be paying for that, because it's a force multiplier when leveraged properly. I remember I did so at this 30 acts of kindness thing that I launched with my dad, I was trying to put a business. I've never run a not-for-profit before, so it was my first time doing a not-for-profit. So I spent 3 hours doing a brainstorming session about the business with AI, and when I was done, I had a 100-page business plan effectively that would have taken me 3 months to do, not 3 hours, 3 months, and it wouldn't have been as good as what I did in 3 hours. And and it cost me an AI tool that cost me like $30 a month. You know what I'm saying? Like, you have access to all human knowledge and intelligence at your fingertips for pennies, and you just have to decide you want to leverage it. It's imagine, you might have that really successful or really intelligent friend in some area, and if you had a question, you might call them and ask for their help. You have that at your fingertips now in every single domain area, 24/7, practically for free, and most people aren't taking advantage of it. I even use AI now for my own personal therapy, right? AI is a way better therapist than any human therapist. It's not even close. And people are like, oh, that's really weird. I don't want to talk to a computer. I'm telling you, it's available 24/7. It's practically free. There's no bias built into it. It remembers everything I told it. It's way better than a human therapist. Not even close.
And with that in mind, let's track back a little and capture a few things that may be able to really even bring this up for different people who are looking at, is this company really has true leadership or not? Is it the leader or the CEO kind or not? So what is the first sign that there is no servant leadership in a company?
So I instead of using the word kindness, though I think kindness is wonderful, don't get me wrong, right? I mean, I created a thing called 30 Acts of Kindness, right? I think kindness is great, and the world needs more of it for sure. What I do and what I focus on more, that has to be true in order for someone to be kind anyway, is somebody fair-minded, right? Are they a fair-minded person? In fact, one of the biggest pieces of advice I give to these guys who I mentor is, whenever they're dealing with someone initially, maybe they're negotiating a transaction, or they're talking to someone who they're thinking about bringing on as an advisor or an employee, have conversations, have that person tell you stories about situations they've dealt with and how they dealt with those situations. And you get someone to tell you 3 or 4 different stories, you'll be able to tell by how they tell that story if they're a fair-minded person. And as soon as someone shows me they're not fair-minded, I'm out. Because if they're not fair-minded, they're not going to be kind. Because I would argue that fair-mindedness is a prerequisite for kindness. And you see it all the time where, again, people say, do as I say, not as I do. Like, that's not a fair-minded person, right? And I don't need to know anything else. Now, it's not to say that person could be really capable. They could be really smart. They might be really successful, but they're not going to be kind, and they're not going to be fair-minded. And that's just a non-starter for me. And I think that it's a really good sign. I mean, look, my daughter is in the process, she's worked for 2 companies since she finished college. And in both cases, the leadership were disasters,
Mm.
disasters. And she was unhappy at both companies. And hopefully this third time she'll take my advice, which is focus on the leadership. Focus
Yeah.
on, are those people fair-minded? So when you're in the interview process, you need to be interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you, and say, is this person fair-minded? Because my experience is, if I'm dealing with someone who's fair-minded and I know I'm fair-minded, right? There's almost always a solution. There's almost always a path forward. But if one or both people are not fair-minded, it's going to be a disaster.
Absolutely. And I'm asking, if I'm listening to these stories that I'm being told by the leaders or even employees of that company, how do I know whether a team is aligned or just polite?
You mean whether they're being honest about the stories they're telling you?
Yeah.
The beautiful part is, people that are not fair-minded don't realize they're not fair-minded, right? So they think they are, right? But that's the bigger problem. And so
Mm,
they don't even know enough to be dishonest about it. Because,
mm,
as an example, if I interview someone, let's say that they've had 2 or 3 jobs before, interviewing with me, and I
mm,
ask them about, their prior experiences, and I'll say, well, tell me about a really difficult situation you had and how you dealt with it. Or,
mm,
tell me a situation where your boss told you to do something that you felt really uncomfortable with, but, how did you handle a situation like that? So I give them some scenarios like that. And because they're having to come up with it off the top of their head, no one can think that fast, right? And they don't even
mm,
realize that the things they're saying are dishonest. So, part of what I do with my daughter, as an example, is like, I prepare her for, hey, these are the kinds of questions to ask to help you get to, is this a fair-minded person? Because there really are about, you could ask about 4 or 5, 6 questions at most.
mhm.
If you gave me any person on the planet, I don't care who they are, and I get
Yeah.
to ask them 5 or 6 questions, I'll be able to tell you by how they answer whether they're fair-minded or not. And it comes down to giving them a situation that's genuinely, from an integrity standpoint, challenging,
Yeah.
right? And asking them how they deal with that situation. You ask, 3, 4, 5 questions like that, and you'll know whether they're fair-minded or not.
Interesting. So let's move gears a bit and cover the segment around, founder operator to company architect, where, a founder can carry a company at the early stage through intensity, instinct, and personal, what they call gut. Sometimes also sacrifice using their resources, because either the team is small, or the scale at which they need to experience their leadership skills is not that visible to so many people, and you can self-correct. But there's a point where a founder's strength becomes the company's bottleneck, and the founder is still solving too many problems personally. The team moves for direction, decision slows down, accountability becomes disaster, and the company cannot scale beyond the founder's nervous system. And I'm sure people who have worked with startups, majority of them, they are broken at that point. So here's a question. How does a founder move from being the best operator in the company to becoming the architect of how the company operates?
So the short answer is, most people can't make that transition, unfortunately. And the reason they can't make that transition is, in my experience, you need 3 things in order for that to be true. You
Mhm.
need to have humility, you need to have curiosity,
Mhm.
and you need to be self-aware and introspective, right?
Yeah.
The problem is, very few people have those 3 qualities. I would say it's less than 5%. It might be less than 2%. And so
Mm.
if you have those 3 qualities, you can grow with any organization. So one of the companies I am an advisor to, the guy who's the CEO is 25. He's a first time, founder. He only started the business in August, so it hasn't even been a year. And we'll probably have a 9-figure exit for over $100 million here in the next 12 months.
Yeah.
And he, thankfully, he's all 3 of those. He's super self-aware and introspective. He's super humble, and he's super curious.
Yeah.
And said a different way, it's totally fine to be bad at things. What is the kiss of death in business is to think you're good at something you're bad at. Okay.
Mm.
So if you think
Mm.
you're a people person and people don't like you, that's a problem. You think you're good with numbers, but you suck with numbers, that's a problem. You think you understand technology, but you don't, that's a problem. So having the humility and not thinking you have to have all the answers. And I would say too, like what Cole did was, he was thoughtful and introspective enough to be like, I know there's a whole bunch of things I don't know. I've never sold a company. I know I want to sell a company. I've never scaled a company. Let me, him and I had met each other. So he asked me to, I was just giving him advice. I didn't even have any equity at first. I was just giving him advice because he was a nice guy and he asked me for help. So I was being helpful. And then eventually he's like, Dave, I'm insisting I give you equity in my company because I really want you to help mentor me. Right.
Mm.
So I think, and it's funny, like when I did my first business after business school, I think I also am a reasonably humble guy. I was running a 400-person call center business and I knew I didn't know what I was doing. So I had the humility where I brought in this 3-woman executive team. They came from the largest company in the industry, and I persuaded them to leave there and to come work for my company. I gave them equity, and I said, look, I know I don't know what I'm doing. So technically you might work for me, but I work for you. Like
Yeah.
I'm here to, make sure we have enough capital, that you have the right resources, but you're going to be doing the operating stuff because you know what you're doing and I don't. And I knew what I didn't know, right? And I was
Yeah.
honest with myself, and I wasn't just trying to pretend like I had the answer when I didn't. And so, people always say fake it till you make it. I don't know. I can see an argument for that, when you're really, really, really early in your career. So you can be in the right rooms and people will, have a conversation with you. But I think there's a lot of downside to faking it that I think people underestimate.
100%. And when I think about founders even more, at what point should you delegate? Is it when you find out that you're making all the decisions? Or is it when you feel like now the efficiency has reduced? Or is it just because the team has grown? Or is it because the numbers are deteriorating? Or is it because the board requested you to do other functions that really require your attention? So at what point do you start delegating and ensuring that even in this delegation, there are better systems to manage the same, kind of efficiency that you expect?
If the board is having to come to you, and telling you to do something differently, then you have a big problem, right? Because the board should not be nearly as close to the business as you.
Yeah.
I haven't, the beautiful thing about it is when you have someone that has that humility and has that curiosity, I think it's automatic. Cole comes to me all the time and he'll be like, Dave, I don't think I'm doing enough, or I don't think I have the right people, or whatever it might be. And we'll have a conversation about, well, tell me why you think that, Cole. And we'll talk it through. In some cases, I'll be like, well, I know why you might feel that way, but here's why I disagree. And here's what I think. Or no, you've got a really good point. Yeah, we do need to bring on a product manager, and let's talk about how we find the right product manager and, blah, blah, blah. So it really does come down to the humility, and people make the mistake. It's the same thing about servant leadership. People mistake humility for weakness. They think, well, if I'm humble, if I don't have any ego, then I'm not going to have drive and ambition. It's not true. You can have a ton of drive. Cole is one of the most driven, ambitious people I've ever met. He's super humble, right? And I think partly because he was a very competitive athlete. He played Division I college football, and he was really, really good in high school and struggled in college. And I had the same thing. I was a really good high school wrestler, and I really struggled when I wrestled in college. Having that experience where you went from being the best to being mediocre, that kind of humbling experience is a good life lesson, because pretending you're good at things you don't, like I said, comes with an awful lot of downside. So I also think being a little bit, I'll use the word paranoid, being a little bit paranoid about a blind spot. Like Cole is definitely that way. He's so paranoid that he's missing something. Am I not doing enough of this? Am I not doing enough of that? But he uses me as a way to reflect on that. Dave, I feel like maybe I'm not doing enough here. And like I said, sometimes I'll agree with him. Sometimes I'll disagree with him. We'll talk it through. We'll figure it out together. But so he's taking someone that has a lot more experience than him, that he trusts will be honest with him. And by the way, Cole doesn't take my advice just like that. Like he wants, and one of the things I'm very careful about is I don't just give advice. I give the why behind every piece of advice. I want Cole to understand the advice I'm giving him deeply. One, because then it's going to be more persuasive. And two, eventually Cole's going to be giving that advice to other people, and I want him to understand why.
And my My last clarification question on the same topic is that how can you do accountability or implement accountability framework without micromanagement? Because there's some people who actually go overboard and they look like they care too much, but what they're doing actually they're just micromanaging.
Yeah. If you need if there's someone in your organization you need to micromanage, or you have a leader who feels like they have to micromanage, you've made a hiring mistake, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Micromanagement is a sign of weakness and insecurity. It's
Yeah.
not, there's no such thing as an exceptional leader who's a micromanager. Let's say someone like, again, I don't think Elon Musk is a good leader. I think he's an exceptional entrepreneur. But if you listen to the way Elon solves problems is the same way that I do, which is he might have 2 or 3 layers of management between him and whatever the problem is. And if things are going well, he doesn't touch it. But when things stop going well, when there's a problem, when deadlines are getting missed, he doesn't go through management. He goes directly to the person doing the thing that is bottlenecked. And again, he's not trying to usurp the authority of the other person. He just needs to solve the problem. Again, you serve the people you lead. If there's bottlenecks, my job is to fix the bottleneck. And I can't fix the bottleneck if I don't understand the problem at a first principles level, right? So I do the same thing. I go directly to the person who's trying to solve the problem that's bottlenecked, and I will then get a clear understanding that doesn't come through anybody else, right? It's my own discernment, and they explain what the bottleneck is, and then I'll fix it. Then I know how to fix it. So I think it really comes down to that. You don't want to have any micromanagers. You don't want micromanagers in your company, and you don't want people to have to be micromanaged. That means if either of those are true, you made a hiring mistake, in my opinion.
Yeah. Are you saying no one should be managed?
Oh no, they should be managed. They should be. They definitely be managed and have accountability, right? But so for me, let's say that I have someone, as an example. Let's say I have my head of marketing, okay, and the goal for the year is we're going to have. I'm just going to make it up. We were doing 10 million, and by the end of the year, we want to be doing 15 million. Let's just say 50% growth. And so we lay out the budget and the plan, how much money the chief marketing officer is going to need to execute on that plan. We agree on the plan. We agree on what the top line is going to be. Everyone's bought into it. It's not my plan. It's our plan, right? That's what I'm going to hold them accountable to. And so long as they're performing at or above where we said we're going to be, I don't even have to talk to that person, right? But if we're supposed to be growing 50% and we're only going to grow 15%, well, now we got to have a problem. Now we have a problem. So, okay, now it could be the plan was wrong, that our plan was wrong. Then we have to adjust the plan, right? If that's what happened. And that's why you have both a budget and a forecast. So you can make adjustments. In fact, we did that, with MenuFit with Cole. We made adjustments based on how quickly we thought doing some paid advertising was going to be a little bit faster than it turned out that it was. And so we had to make adjustments to the plan. That's okay. But you have to be clear-eyed about it. And again, it's having that humility to be okay being wrong. Even if you're brilliant and really experienced, you're going to be wrong something like 30% of the time. Okay. So how can you be so sure this isn't part of that 30%? So always being open to being wrong it will allow you to, having the humility to always potentially be wrong, will allow you to take in new information and make adjustments. If you can't, if you're emotionally invested in being right, if you're emotionally invested in being the smartest person in the room, it makes it really hard to take in new information and make adjustments. And that's why ego and bad leadership creates the downfall of so many companies, is because they become so invested in it that they stay on the same path until it's too late.
For founders listening, CEOs and leaders across the globe, write this down privately if you need to. What decision are you still holding that your company may have already outgrown? Now, as a computer scientist to another, I want to be a bit technical about this and think about a company as a system, right? So because you have a computer science background, I want to use a more technical lens on this. If a company is a system, leadership is not just personality. It becomes architecture, and architecture with algorithm that really works. There are inputs, output, incentives, feedback loops, interfaces, dependencies, failure modes, technical debts, and so on. So my question would be around this. If you are designing a company like a software system, what are the core components that must be architected before scale?
That's a really interesting question. I want to make sure I give you a thoughtful answer to that. So I think that the core components come down to having a set of core values to your, to your company is super critical, because that's the filter that everything runs through. And at the end of the day, your business is going to succeed or die based on the talent pool, the people that you have in your organization, and then the plan you have to execute with that talent pool. So I think the you need to make sure that you've got a thoughtful bottoms up budgeting and forecasting function in your organization. You need a set of core values to your organization that everyone is bought into. You need alignment of incentives so that people are not at odds with each other. That something that makes one person happy and satisfied makes other people unhappy and unsatisfied. So that's why, like I said, make sure that everyone has equity in the organization, I think is super important. I think if you can do that, if you have a set of core values, you have a process for how you hire, reward, and incentivize people, that you make everybody an owner and you treat everybody like an owner, really, really transparent communication across the board for everybody. I think if you have those core components, most businesses can be successful. And the thing that's interesting is, I think it's the only thing that has a higher failure rate than marriage is businesses, right? It's like probably 80% at least. Think about it. I forget the statistic, but I think it's something like 60 or 65% of the companies that were in the Fortune 500 in the year 2000 don't exist anymore. Think about, Blockbuster, Borders, Radio Shack. These are huge companies. They don't even exist anymore. And oftentimes it's because of arrogance, right? It's because Netflix, Blockbuster could have bought Netflix for pennies, right? Borders could have bought Amazon.
Yahoo could have bought Google.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. And so, but no, these companies were like, no, we're smarter than they are, right? We're not. Kodak, they came out with digital photography like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, something like that, and they shelved it because they didn't want to ruin their film business, right? It's like you're not going to stop the progression of technology and advancement. So I think that if you can do those basic things, that infrastructure will allow you to scale almost any business. But it ultimately comes down to the people. If you don't have the right people, if you don't hire right, none of this works.
So what is the business equivalent of technical debt?
Another really good question. It's so funny. Technical debt's such an interesting thing that engineers and computer scientists understand. Like people be like, "What do you mean we have to fix this other stuff?" It's like you say, right? You can do, is it cheap, good, and fast? Pick two, right? Because hey, if I do it cheap and I do it fast, I'm gonna have a whole bunch of technical debt I'm gonna have to deal with downstream. I guess the equivalent of technical debt, and I never thought about this before this, so I'm glad you asked me the question because I'm probably going to use this for something, is not firing soon enough. Because in the same way that having a really good hire can really accelerate, like one really good hire that brings other people with them can be really a great accelerant to a business. One really bad hire can really damage a business in a way that's really hard to quantify, like how big of an impact it can have. And so I would say the wrong people on the team is probably the technical debt. And look, again, unless you're a sociopath, no one enjoys firing people. I've probably fired 200, 250 people in my career, and every single one of them was painful, even when they absolutely deserved it, and it's the only thing that is 100% true in my professional career. Zero exceptions. Every single time I've had the thought that I should fire someone and I've delayed firing them, I have regretted it. Not a single exception in a 35-year career. So that's a lot of data points. And so now as soon as I have the thought, I rip off the Band-Aid,
Wonderful. And what is the business equivalent of architecture and observability?
So I would say the business equivalent of architecture is probably the organizational structure itself, right? The how do you have your functions organized? Who's responsible for what? One of the mistakes I see, one of the architecture mistakes that people make is Like, is anytime two people have responsibility for something, nobody does.
Uh,
Whenever I see a company that has co-CEOs, I'm like, you're doomed, right?
yeah.
Co-CEOs never works.
Uh,
Never. As soon as you give two people responsibility, nobody has responsibility.
yeah.
So I think that that organizational structure and how you've done things, I would say it's a combination of your organizational structure and the
Mm,
incentive structure that supports that organizational structure. As an example,
mm,
like your sales compensation plan. I mean,
mm,
I've designed a lot of sales comp plans in my career, and I've seen
mm,
some really, really stupid sales. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've seen sales comp structures where they cap how much a salesperson could make. I'm like, are you an
mm.
idiot? As soon as they've hit their cap, they stop selling. Like, why would you? Why would you ever want to do that? And the answer you get is, well, they're making more than the CEO. Yeah, because they're adding more value
Mm.
than the CEO. They deserve it.
Absolutely. So, Dev, where does culture sit in this system?
I think culture sits at the center of all of it, right? You
Mm,
can be successful with a weak culture, but it
mm,
is so much easier to be successful with a
mm.
good one.
Yeah.
And not only that, but when you have a really good culture, I mean, I remember when I ran that Forex prop trading firm in Miami, it's
Mm,
probably the first time that I built my entire team from scratch, right?
mm,
And
mm,
oh my God, it was so much fun. Every day was enjoyable.
mhm.
And I mean, almost every, not every minute, but most minutes of every day were enjoyable because I hired really intentionally. I made sure that we were all in alignment, that everyone understood the core values and fully embraced them. I was making everyone an equity holder. It's like when you can really set those things up and you really set up that corporate culture, that sits at the core of success. And again, you can be successful without it, but it's much harder and it's much less fun. The journey is way less fun than if you do it where, and again, another reason why I think it's nice, though not required, to be friends
Mm,
with most of the people that you work with, because these are people you're spending 8, 10 hours a day with, 5 days a week, sometimes
mm.
more. And you want to enjoy that time. And when you enjoy those people and you do things with them socially,
Yeah,
it's really nice.
absolutely. Thank you so much for that wonderful framing and, more like a quick fire and refresh of computer science approach.
Yeah.
For the engineers and product leaders and technical operators out there, this may be the most important metaphor in the conversation. Leadership debt compounds like technical debt. If it's not that clear, then your leadership needs to not have a single technical debt. I think that's very clear. So, um, servant leadership, capital, and commercial discipline is what I want us to talk a bit about. And I want to connect servant leadership to money, which is interesting. Because if you do not do that, I'm too abstract. Companies need revenue, founders need capital, investors expect returns, teams need incentives and salaries. As you said, sales cap should not have a cap at all if people are going above and beyond. So leadership has to serve people, but it also has to serve the commercial reality of the business. How should founders think about servant leadership while still being commercially disciplined?
Well, again, I don't think they're at odds with each other at all. And that's part of the reason why I want every single person to be a shareholder, right? I want everyone
Mm,
to understand those trade-off decisions that are being made. Hey, look, we're not going to get. I'm using this as an example. I know we originally were thinking we were going to give bonuses this year, but instead of giving bonuses this year, we're going to put that money back into the company because if we
mm,
can grow another 20% faster, I think we can exit next year, and I think we can exit for over $100 million, and everyone's going to get a really nice payday, and it's going to be way more than the bonus you would have gotten, as an
mm,
example that I just made up, right?
mm,
But so now all of a sudden, again, it comes down to incentive alignment. That if I have aligned incentives properly, there's no disconnect there. It's not like I'm making a commercial decision that's going to help the company and then it harms the employees. It's not possible because I've
yeah.
aligned the incentives properly. So I not only that, but I also think, again, you'll occasionally find someone who's a sociopath, but most
Yeah.
people that are mentally healthy, they want to do right. They want to do the right thing. They want to be fair minded. Again, if you've hired right and all the people on your team are fair minded, I find that these trade-offs are really easy. One of the other things that I do is I don't create one set of core values. I have two sets of core values. I have an internal set of core values and an external set of core values. Again, the entire team is involved in selecting those core values. And I use the external core values to determine things that, so the internal ones are for hiring, promoting, and rewarding people inside the company. The external core values we use as a filter through what changes are we going to make to the product and service? Who are we going to partner with? When are we going to sell? Who are we going to sell to? Those things are all determined by those external core values. And so by having that alignment of everything that's going to be done internally to the business and everything that's going to be done externally, I just don't find that those run afoul, that those don't conflict with each other.
I see. And talking about revenue, I know money is always sensitive to all the stakeholders. But how should a CEO decide which cost company can live with and which they can't live with?
So say that one more time.
How should a CEO decide which costs the company can live with or without?
Again, I think that, so I'll give you one example that's an extreme one, but I think it makes the point. Years ago when I ran this call center business, we had 400 employees, I think it was. And it was, the business was doing really well, but then because of the .com boom, our cost of labor doubled in 9 months. And so we went from being very profitable to being unprofitable, just like that. It was an externality out of our control. And so we ended up in a situation where we were going to run out of money. We were going to go bankrupt. And I was able to find someone to invest capital, but that required us to relocate one of our call centers from New Jersey to a small town in Maine, in New England. And that meant I had to lay off 50 employees in one day. And I was completely transparent with the people about why I was doing it. I basically said, look, if I don't do this, if I don't lay you off, I said, if I lay you off, I can give you some severance pay because we're bringing in this capital. If I don't lay you off, you're going to have a job for about 4 more weeks. And then we're all going to be out of a job because if I don't raise the money, we're out of money and company's done. So in either case, you're going to lose your job. It's just whether you lose your job today and you get some severance, or you lose your job in 4 weeks and you don't get any severance. And so I was open, I was honest, I was transparent. And of the 50 people I had to lay off, like 48 of them came up to me. They appreciated the fact that I just was very honest and direct. And most of them said, I would do exactly the same thing if I were you. There were a couple that were irrational and pissed off, but at the end of the day, though, when you're making decisions about how you're going to spend capital, right, what you're going to invest in, if you do it in such a way that it's not my money as the CEO or the company's money, it's our money, right? We are deciding to invest this money. Now, obviously, everyone doesn't get to make every decision. As the CEO, I'm the ultimate decision maker. But what I would do is I would communicate to everyone, at least for the things that were important, right? How we were going to spend. It's the reason I would do those quarterly board meetings with the entire company. I would say, here's how we're going to spend our money. And here's why I think that's the right way to spend that money. And I give them the opportunity to say, well, hey, Mr. Guttman, I don't think we should do that. And here's why. And I'm also not the kind of person, I want people to give me their feedback, even if it's negative, And so by doing it that way, and it's not my money, it's not the company's money, it's our money. And I say, here's the decisions that are being made, and here's the reasons behind why those decisions are being made. I give people an opportunity to weigh in if they disagree. Occasionally, not often, occasionally get to a point where you just have to agree to disagree, where they have a position that's different than yours and you can't persuade them. And you say, well, look, I might be wrong. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize. But this is the decision we're making. And, we'll revisit it in 6 months and see if that's the right decision. But I feel like if you do it that way, you very, very rarely run up against a situation where people are upset.
Absolutely. So let's talk a bit about AI. And my first question will be around, what will AI not solve?
I think it's impossible to predict. So as an engineer, I think it's impossible to predict what's going to happen once the AI can learn recursively, right? So once that can happen, and nobody knows, anyone who says they do is lying, right? If you understand about how recursive learning works, and you understand how LLMs work, you'll understand that it's a black box to some extent. We don't know how it reasons, really. And so how can we possibly predict how it's going to work when it's recursive? Like as an example, people will say, well, AI is never going to be able to, tell good jokes. And it's
Mm-hmm.
true today that the jokes that AI creates are not very good.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not so sure that once AI can learn recursively, it won't be able to tell really good jokes, right? Like David Chappelle level jokes. So we'll see, right? But so I don't know that, again, I think I have enough humility to say that I know I don't know, and I don't think anybody does. With
Mm-hmm.
that being said, the way I think about it and the advice I give to people that I care about is I know I can't predict how it's going to play out. There's a lot of things that are out of my control. What's in my control? What's in my control is I can embrace the technology in every way I can think of. And the part that I think will still be around for a while, I don't know if it'll be forever, but for a while, let's call it 10 years or longer,
Yeah.
is the creative process. Because the one thing that it's going to be hard for AI to get as good at as people are good at is understanding what people want, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, as an example, right? Um, I don't think AI would have come up with the idea for 30 acts of kindness. I don't think AI would have come up with the idea for menu fit. Maybe I'm
Mm-hmm.
wrong, but at least for
Yeah.
now, and I think for the foreseeable future, I think that the creative element is the part that humans can still own for the foreseeable future. And at least for now, that's where I'm going to focus my time and energy because it's in my control.
Okay. And what would you tell a founder who thinks AI will fix the operational problems?
Um, I think that they're hallucinating, like AI hallucinates, maybe. I think that look, AI is a great force multiplier. It is a great tool. So, and I use it every day this way, which is I'll be like, here's a problem I'm having, and I will use AI like a super genius friend to help me ideate on the thing I'm thinking about. And I do it
Mm-hmm.
all the time. Both books that I'm going to be finishing here in the next few months, I'm using AI very heavily to help with them. But I'm doing it in such a way that it's still me and my writing, but I'm using AI to allow me to get there way faster than I would have gotten there on my own. So I
Mm-hmm.
really think it comes down to, AI, especially today, as it exists today, it's not solving any problem. It's a great resource to help solve the problem faster and more efficiently and more cost effectively. But it doesn't work on its own to just go fix. Like you can't say, yet, maybe this will change. Hey, look,
Yeah.
here are my 12 email accounts. I have a gazillion email accounts. I want you
Yeah.
to go through all of my email and I want you to send me a list at 6 a.m. every morning of all of the emails that I've gotten that require a response from me. I want you to draft responses for all of them. And then I want to be able to review them and send them off. Now, maybe it'll be there because there's so much discernment. There's so much knowledge and background around who all those people are and the last time I communicated with them and who else is involved and CC'd on the emails. Like there's so much nuance to all of that
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think it's going to get there for a while. It
Yeah.
might get there eventually,
Mm-hmm.
um, but I think it's really hard to predict.
Absolutely. And that's an important distinction for the listeners. So AI can accelerate execution, but if the leadership system is weak, it may be simply accelerating that confusion. Um, and I want to bring in more human side of this conversation. And I know, Dave, you've built and led companies, but you're also involved in work around longevity through Titan Arc. You have mentioned it a
Mhm.
couple of times, and
Mhm.
that act of kindness connected with your father. I find that interesting because it widens the definition of leadership. Leadership is not only about what you build, it is about what your work does to you, what it does to the people around you, and what remains after the transaction, the exit, and or the title. What has built that acts of kindness with your father taught you about leadership that business success alone could not teach you?
Well, one of the things that the nexus of it was my dad's retired and he doesn't have any reason to get out of bed in the morning and he's bored, right? So
Mm,
I simply asked him, well, hey, if you could do anything, what would you want to do? And he said, I want to I want to do something that will help make the world a nicer place. I want people to be nicer to each other because there's so much anger and hatred in the world, and it makes me sad, right? So I was familiar with this app. I don't know if you've heard of it, called 75 Hard, where you document your fitness journey for 75 days.
Mm,
And so I'd done that myself, and so I was aware of it. I'm like, well, what if we had people document their kindness journey? Um,
mm,
and so that was the idea for. I wanted to give my dad something to do, and that was the only thing I was trying to accomplish. One, it'd be nice to do it with my dad. And again, I have no background or experience doing anything for a not-for-profit. So I was like, well, so again, my motives were completely pure. I just wanted to give my dad something interesting to do. And I hadn't seen this excited in 20 years. He really loved the idea. He really wanted to do it. But what I've learned after the fact is, and it's funny, I wish I had figured this out sooner, earlier in my career. I should have done
mm.
something like this 15 or 20 years ago, if not longer,
Yeah,
because it's interesting to have something to talk about with people where there's
mm,
no transaction involved, you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
And I grossly underestimated how nice it would be that I could have a conversation about something that is important to me, that is meaningful to me, but that's not transactional. There's no money that's going to come to me because I'm doing 30 acts of kindness. In fact, I'm losing money. I'm spending money. I'm funding. We're funding it ourselves.
yeah,
So um, I underestimated that, and I guess the part that made me feel really good about it was how positively every single person that I've talked to about it has reacted to it. And I'm like, man, yeah, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of bad in the world, but there's a lot of good in the world too. And you could focus your time and attention on all the things that are terrible, but
mm,
that's not going to make your trip through life very happy. Or you can focus on the things about it that are nice. And there's plenty of
mm,
things about it that are wonderful, and there's plenty of wonderful people. So,
yeah,
I think that having something like that um, is it's just a nice part of sort of traveling through life, and I think that it filters into it sort of reinforced some of the things that I did maybe without realizing why I did it. But it kind of reinforced for me that doing something without any expectation of something in return, there should be some slice of your energy that goes to that kind of thing, where I'm
yeah,
going to do this thing. I'm going to spend time, attention, energy, and even money on this thing. And there's probably no benefit that's going to come to me from doing it, but I'm going to do it
yeah,
anyway because it's a good thing to do. And I think that whether that's 10 or 20% of your energy, some amount of your energy that's going to that kind of stuff is just a good idea. I think as a leader, as a human being, and just as someone who wants to travel through life in a way that's a little bit happier.
wonderful. And I know when we look at our fathers, especially when they have lived it all, and also we work with them, we learn a couple of things. How is your relationship with your father shaped your thinking about legacy?
So legacy is an interesting topic for me. When people talk about legacy, I ask the question, do you know the first name of your 8 great grandparents? I've never met anybody who knows the first name of their 8 great grandparents. So these are people you're directly descendant from by just a couple of generations, and you don't even know their name, right?
Yeah,
So the idea of I would argue almost the arrogance of thinking it will matter that you lived 100 years from now, or certainly 1,000 years from now, is kind of silly. Now, with that being said, um, you know, I don't believe life has intrinsic meaning. I think we get to choose what meaning we want to assign to the life we have. And some people
mm,
find that concept very frightening almost, like, oh, life doesn't matter. I actually don't find it that way at all. I get to decide what meaning I want to assign, what purpose I want my life to have. That's actually very satisfying to me. I get to make that choice. So if I
mm,
decide that the most important thing to me is having a rich, deep relationship with my father and my wife and my daughter and my brother. I left Miami to move to Arizona just so I could help my brother with some health issues he was having. And by the way, people be like, "Oh, Dave, that's so nice that you did that for your brother." I didn't do that for my brother. I did that for myself, because
yeah,
my identity, my self-image is that if I could have done something to be helpful to him and I didn't do it, then I could never forgive myself. And so I think that making those choices consciously, is just really important. And I feel like uh, I feel that it's not legacy. Like, I don't think it'll matter that I lived in 100 years, but I
yeah,
think it'll matter that I lived in 20 years after I'm gone. And it'll especially matter to those people that I had a really big impact on. And, I've done some things like, I have a top 1% TED Talk of all time, which I'm really proud of. That'll be around forever, probably. Now, is that a
Yeah.
legacy? I don't know. I mean, not really. But it's like, hey, I'd rather have put some stuff, I'll write some books and those will be around forever in some form or another.
Yeah.
Is that legacy? Probably not. But, the fact that that might, impact people a decade from now, 30 or 40 years from now, that's nice to
Yeah.
think about. Now I'll be gone, so it won't matter.
Yeah.
But at least as I travel through life, knowing that there'll be some ripple effects even after I'm gone, that's a satisfying feeling.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. So what does Titan Hack represent in your current season of work?
Well, so the way I met my co-founder, Dr. Rich Hanley, he actually came on my podcast. I was doing some podcasts at a longevity conference called WellCon, and so I met him on that, and then him and I became friendly, and he asked for my help on helping him get this Titan Arc business off the ground. And originally I was just doing it, really as a friend, and then eventually he said, Dave, please just come do this with me. I don't think I can do it without you. I want to do it. I want your help. And partly because I really like Rich, and partly because I want it for myself. I just turned 60. My guided meditation that I do every day is I imagine that I'm 100, which would make my daughter 65, and we've just hiked a mountain together and watching the sunset. So I think that's possible. I think that I can still remain healthy and fit, even to being 100 years old. And that's really what I'm trying to do. So for me, Titan Arc, it really is only for ultra high net worth folks. I mean, it's very expensive, but it is the app. It's if you're familiar with Brian Johnson, it's basically like Brian Johnson. It's a completely customized protocol. Everything from, we look at everything in your home, unlimited testing. It includes TRT and peptides if you need them, like you name it. We look at everything. And so I wanted it for myself, and so therefore, and I want to be able to make it available to others. And it's been really fun and exciting to do that. And, I was fairly knowledgeable about a lot of things, health and longevity and fitness related, but I've really learned a lot in the last year since we started working on this. And I definitely had some things wrong. I had some things wrong about exercise. I had some things wrong about cardiovascular exercise. And I had some things wrong about diet and nutrition that I've modified, now that I've kind of gone down that rabbit hole. And again, AI is a huge enabler here, where you can really, if you're familiar with things like proteomics and organs on a chip, they have AI that's really accelerating the learnings around everything from pharmaceuticals to peptides, so you name it, things that would have taken decades that can get done in weeks or months.
And in that case that you mentioned longevity, what does the longevity change about how you think about ambition?
Ambition. Ambition's an interesting term. I consider myself an ambitious person, but some people might not. Like for me, I have zero interest in being a billionaire. Like that doesn't even make sense to me, right? And again, no judgment, right? But to me, the people I know that are like that, they're not happy people, right? They're not enjoying their trip through life. If anything, their trip through life is somewhat miserable. And money is a magnifier, right? If you're really content, satisfied, happy person, I think money can magnify that. But who needs more than $100 million, $50 million? Like at some point, like it gets a little ridiculous. And again, I'm not a tax the rich and don't let there be any billionaires. I don't think about it that way. But I do think that just from a personal development standpoint, if that's your scorecard, is I've got to have this many zeros, you're focused on the wrong things.
And that brings the conversation full circle, because servant leadership is not only about serving employees or customers. It's also about how a leader relates to time, health, family, legacy, and meaning. So how has your definition of success changed over time?
Well, so, I don't know how much you know about this background, but my TED Talk was about the fact that I was misdiagnosed by 3 doctors and told I had 6 months to live when I was 24 years old. So at the age of 24, I was told by 3 doctors, not one, but 3, that I'd be dead in 6 months, the last of which was an oncologist at Sloan Kettering in New York City, which at the time was the best cancer hospital in the world. So I really thought I would be dead in 6 months. And since that occurred, it changed, it reframed everything, as you might expect. Not that it's not that I lost my ambition. I just decided that I was going to channel it into the people around me. And ultimately what ended up happening was, success still came my way. It just came in a much more satisfying way. I mean, I'll help Cole make over $100 million. That's more than I've made in my career. But I'm thrilled that I could be so helpful. And the fact that he did better than me, good for him. Like, I'm thrilled. To me, I don't, I'll say this, and this will sound maybe self-gratifying, self-aggrandizing, but I've never felt jealous or envious of anybody. There's no one I've ever wanted to be besides me. I feel very fortunate. I don't feel special. I feel very fortunate. I was born to loving parents. I was given a fair shot at life. I had some hardships. There were things that made it really hard for me. I had a severe learning disability. I was physically very small. So it wasn't like everything was perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it could have been a heck of a lot worse. And so I feel really fortunate. And so for me, I take it as part of my life's mission ever since turned out I didn't die, obviously, that every time I was given an opportunity to touch somebody's life in a positive way, I would do that. And I think I've stayed pretty true to that for the last 35 years. And I'm happy about the path I've chosen through life. It's not perfect. I'm not perfect by any stretch. Do I have some regrets? I have a few, not many, but a few. If I go back in a time machine, there's a few things I'd do differently. But all in all, I think I picked a path through life. And I'll say this too. I don't fear death like many people do, because I was so close to it and I had to confront it at such a young age. Again, I think that was a wonderful gift. I don't, I'm obviously not looking forward to dying anytime soon. That's part of why I'm doing the longevity business. I want to stick around for my daughter and my wife. My wife's a good bit younger than me. I want to stick around for as long as I can. But if I die tomorrow, I'm okay with that. Like, I've had more joy, happiness than people did in 5 lifetimes. So I already feel like I won. I want to try to help as many other people win as I possibly can. I want to stick around for as long as I can and continue, winning and helping other people win. But I'm ready. Whenever it happens, it happens.
I see. And you mentioned that, thank you for sharing that, because I feel like it's a bit personal and it's really serious. And maybe I'll look now for the TED talk and really watch, because it's kind of interesting. So you mentioned that billionaires or money exemplify who we are, and most of us actually, we have that inner evil, let me call it that, for lack of better definition, that is amplified when we really don't need anything. We are not in a transaction, and we have more than abundance. How do you really talk to a CEO, a founder, or a leader to build the inner self before the outer self? And this is coming from, as impact masters, we believe that body, mind, and spirit, and here you can say spirit, soul, need to really to be well aligned at any given time to live fully and to enjoy the present moment. And that even in this podcast, or the conversation that we have, even the product we build, we seek to amplify that, because engineering can actually be used for good or for evil. So how do you build the inner self to really exemplify the outer self, which is the body, and to nourish the mind to be able to live in the present moment as a leader?
Look, I think you have to have some of the raw materials, right? And I think those raw materials, like we talked about before, are sort of that humility, curiosity, and self-awareness and introspection. And the reason that combination is so critical is, if you're not curious, you might be the dumbest person in the room, but if you're the most curious person in the room, you will eventually be the smartest person in the room, right? The curious person does a lot less talking and a lot more listening. And over time, that person becomes the smartest person in the room. And so if you have all three, if you have the humility of being wrong, you have the curiosity to be a lifelong learner, and you have that self-awareness and introspection to, seek your blind spots, listen to advice, be okay with being wrong, making adjustments, owning your mistakes, apologizing, fixing things whenever you can. I feel like if you can do those things, you have all the materials to have a fantastic, holistically wonderful life. But if you don't have those three qualities, and like I said, I think unfortunately, I think it's less than 5% do. I think that the ability to truly have a satisfying life is diminished. I do think the good news, it's the reason why I'm doing this life maxing book, to be frank, to be honest about it, is while I think it's only 5% of the people possess them, I think something like 60 or 70% of people could develop them if they chose to, if they were intentional about it. Because I think that people understood why those, because I wasn't, I didn't always have the humility that I have now, right? That was something that I developed, right? Through making mistakes and having people that I respect tell me, Dave, don't be a jerk, or through life kicking me in the teeth or being told I was dying. I had plenty of things that helped me become humble. I didn't start that way. And so the nice thing about it is not everyone, but most people can become those three things. But without those three qualities, I think it's impossible.
Wonderful. So, David, if you could leave founders with one uncomfortable but useful question, what would it be?
I guess the ask yourself, do you really love yourself? Like fully. And like the kind of friend you are, the kind of son you are, the kind, son or daughter you are, the kind of father or mother you are if you have children, all of those things, the kind of business person, do you always operate from a place of integrity? I think that it's being able to be brutally honest with yourself about your strengths and your weaknesses. I mean, here's what I would say when I put my own life under a microscope. I can't think of a single situation in my entire life where I did not know what the right decision was to make, about what the most ethical, moral decision was. I'd be lying if I said I always did that. Like sometimes I would talk myself into a decision that, I felt was pragmatic or whatever it might be. But I knew what the right decision was. And as I've gotten older, I've just become inflexible, I think for good reasons, that I just don't do something against my moral compass ever. And I think making that shift has made me a much more content person that's just really comfortable in my own skin. And I think that if leaders ask themselves that honestly, I think most people would make some adjustments. And I think that that's good.
Wow, that's deep. David, this has been a serious conversation about servant leadership, scale, systems, capital, accountability, AI, longevity, kindness, and legacy. And what I learned myself is that all these actually makes a whole human being, not just a leader, not just a CEO, not just a founder. What I appreciate is that we have not treated leadership as a personality or inspiration or motivation, as most people call it. We have treated it as something much more operational, and you have given real life examples using your experiences and interaction in different aspects of life and work. It is how incentives are designed. It is how trust is built. It is how pressure is handled. And it is how people grow, including the leaders themselves. And ultimately, it is how companies either scale with integrity or break under their own ambition and pressure. Before we close, where should people follow your work, learn more about what you are building, and connect with you?
Well, so across all my social media channels, I'm at Real Dave Guttman. Both my podcasts on YouTube, one's called The Business of Wellness. That's my longevity one. The other one's called the David Guttman Podcast, but you can find them both on my YouTube channel. I'm also on Spotify, and I'm a top 50 Business Apple podcast now, the David Guttman Podcast. My TED Talk, you can find my TED Talk, which if you're able to put in the show notes would be great. I already crossed over 100. I think I'm at 110,000 views now. 98% of TED Talks don't get over 10,000 views lifetime. And I've crossed about 110,000 in about 5 weeks. And so I think my TED Talk is really impactful. So I'd love people to not just listen to it, but share it if they find it useful and impactful. But across all my social medias, anyone who just wants to reach out to me, want to bounce an idea off me, whatever, I'm not going to charge you anything. Just DM me, whatever. Happy to be helpful to people. Yeah, just any way I could be helpful. That's the way I want to travel through life.
Thank you so much, David. That's so kind of you, and also spending over almost 2 hours with us sharing.
Yeah, this is the longest podcast I've ever done, by the way. I have to say, Michael, I don't think I've ever been asked more intense, deep questions than I have today, and so I want to really appreciate that you did that.
I appreciate the feedback, and I normally tell my guests I use simple principle when I do this podcast, and why I started this podcast, because I realized there are conversations that are comfortable to have and uncomfortable to have. And my guests are like, how can I do even 20 minutes of conversation? I'm like, if it's interesting, we can do 6 hours of conversation. Imagine talking to your friend. You don't realize it's night or day because the conversation is quite interesting, and it's like you're talking to someone you like. And my hope is that even the people who listen, the people who watch this afterwards or the rest of their life, they find it interesting and helpful in their life. And I'm so grateful, David, for making time for this. I don't take it lightly for me. It's quite
I can tell. I can tell.
Yeah. For everyone watching or listening, the challenge from this conversation is simple. You don't only scale the company, scale the leadership system the company depends on. If this conversation was useful, subscribe to Impact Masters, follow the podcast on your preferred platform. We are everywhere: Amazon, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, everywhere that you know your favorite. These are everywhere. Just look for Impact Masters and you'll find our wonderful podcast, amongst many other. Comment, share, and also, if our guests recommend something you can watch, or even go and check it out, or even buy. Sometimes it goes an extra mile to really support other Impact Masters across the world, because the people you see are not just ordinary people. They're not the people you know every day, but they're really, really good at what they do. I'm out of words because I'm also learning a lot. But if you comment and ask the question, I'll try and get back there and even tag Dave to see what he has to say about it, in case anything that you missed or maybe find interesting. You can find more on what you do and frameworks, and even what we're launching as a community at impactmasters.io, and also on all social media at impactmasters.io. I'm Michael Kimathi. Thank you for listening, and have a lovely day or night, depending on where you listen us from. Thank you so much. Until next time, bye.
Thanks, Michael.